actress, novelist, scriptwriter and comedian, but in fact my guest is much more than that. She also has that magical quality that's hard to describe. So perhaps I should let her tell her story herself today as I introduce you to Meera Syal. Welcome to the program, Meera.
Thank you very much, Karan.
I've heard you described as a daughter of two cultures with a big mouth and an itchy pen.
Really? I bet that was my mother that said that.
But is it accurate?
Yeah, I certainly do have two cultures, I suppose. I would describe myself as a British-born Indian, and I'm quite proud of both of them.
What about the mouth?
I like my mouth. It might be big, but it's useful. Hey, you need a big mouth in Britain to get noticed.
Now, you were born in Essington, which is a mining town in the English Midlands.
That's right, yeah.
How did your parents end up there?
Really my mother's influence, actually. My mother was a village girl from the Punjab. So, you know, when she arrived in grey, cold, wet Britain, the nearest she could get to recreating, I think, something like home was to be somewhere green and peaceful. And while all our other friends, the other newly arrived immigrants, were choosing to live in the very urban areas, my mother said, no, I can't stand it. I've got to be somewhere where I can see the sky. So these houses came up in this village, which were basically old miners' cottages, very ramshackle, 2 rooms upstairs, 2 rooms downstairs, no bathroom, outside toilet. And my father sort of looked at it and went, you want to live here? But all my mother saw was the fields and the trees and the sky. So we ended up in this village with the only non-white people that had ever been there. So we were literally the local colour. And that's where I lived for my first 13 years.
It was also Enoch Powell country, wasn't it? Did you face a lot of racism being the only Asian?
Well, you know, surprisingly, not from the people we lived with. It was a very small, tight community, and we were all poor. We were all at the bottom of the heap. And in a way, there was a real community spirit. We lived very simply. There was racism, of course there is, but that tended to come from people outside the village rather than the people we lived alongside.
So those who knew you, liked you, loved you, and didn't discriminate?
No, not really. I mean, you know, the English have this strange way of describing you where they go, well, we don't like those brown people, but not you. You're like us. You're one of us. And they think it's a compliment. So we'd get that. We'd get people that didn't see us as all those other Indians that are very strange people and we don't understand them. We like you because we know you. And that's basically how ignorance functions, isn't it? So I would say my memories of that place are very, very happy because I grew up with a great deal of freedom. You know, my other girlfriends were living in the cities. Every street was patrolled by a Masi. There was nothing you could get away with. I, on the other hand, had my freedom. I was out every day on my bike in the fields, climbing trees.
Indulgent parents?
Loving parents, but firm and fair.
You were also surrounded by what you call aunties and uncles. Were these the Masis on the street corners?
Yeah, God, yeah. Lots of them. It was very strange. It's called a schizophrenic existence, and I think this is quite common with a lot of British-born Indians of my generation, because inside the home was Pakka Punjabi. You know, we spoke the language, we ate the food. All my friends, my parents' friends were Punjabi, and they were the people that would descend and spend all our weekends with us. Outside the home, I was a Midland village girl with a really broad accent and a completely different set of values and wanted to fit in with my friends. So it's probably no wonder I became an actress and a writer because we changed masks all the time. We were very good at it.
Now, in your book, Anita and Me, the central character, Meena, is always looking to be British, always wanting to be fitting in. Was that, in a sense, an emotion you shared when you were growing up?
I think it is, sadly. I mean, I'm not proud of that, but I think that's a child's thing. A child's instinct is to fit in. Children hate being different. You know, you'll find if a child is fat or they've got ginger hair or they've got spots, they hate it because they know they're going to be picked on because they're different. And certainly in the 70s, when I was growing up, was a very bad time in terms of racism in Britain. The National Front, which is a far right-wing group, were very strong in our area particularly. And you know, if you're Jewish, people don't know you're Jewish when you walk down the street. They know with us. It's really obvious where we come from. So in a way, that's when I decided, sort of, certainly in my late teens, I thought, I'm not going to deny who I am anymore. I'm proud of who I am. I have to embrace what makes me different. Because there's no point pretending I am English. I will never be accepted.
They used to call you the jukebox girl or the class clown. Was that an attempt just to be a comic, or was that also partly an attempt to win approval and recognition?
Both, I think. I mean, people don't beat you up if you make them laugh. So I think it was certainly a sort of defence mechanism, maybe. I was a very bright child. I mean, I I was brighter than a lot of my classmates. But
3 straight A's and a double first in university.
yeah, I'm a very good girl. I did my studies. But also what galled them, I suppose, is that I was particularly good at English. So here was this little Indian girl from the, you know, backwater village who spoke and wrote better English than a lot of the people that came from England, which is rather bizarre. So I think that was part of it. But also I always felt that humour broke down so many barriers. I think a good humorous piece of work, piece of acting, piece of writing, can teach people more, illuminate people more, touch people more than 1,000 political speeches, if you get it right. So I learnt quite early on that humour was quite a powerful weapon.
And being a stand-up comic and a mimic is just natural too.
Yeah, I think I grew up in that kind of family. I mean, we were a family that have a lot of laughs. My parents are very easygoing, warm people, and what I particularly liked about them is that they were always pricking pomposity, you know, which is a big part of our culture. We do have the show-offs. You have Mr. Kumar as a Mercedes, you know. You have all that sort of showing off that goes on. And my parents never fell for that. They were always sort of sniggering at people that were rather above themselves. So quite early on, I picked that up from them, that they weren't going to toe the party line. They always looked at things, like, you know, beneath the surface.
Now, when it came to university, you didn't choose to go to Oxford, although you could have. You went instead to Manchester, and then you didn't take up a conventional subject, you chose drama. So what did the aunties and the uncles make of that?
It caused some reaction. I have to say my parents were pretty good, because I think they realised quite early on that, you know, I was obviously gifted in those areas and so bad at maths and chemistry that there was no way I was going to be a doctor, so I had to abandon that very quickly. But I did get a very strange reaction from some of their friends. I remember one uncle sort of towering over me and saying, "What do you want to do English for? Who wants a brown woman to teach their children English?" You know, as if I was going to teach anyway. But this was the attitude that, you know, Indians only did certain things: pharmacy, medicine, law. That's it, or run your own business.
It was at Manchester that you first began to act and write. Is it true that you wrote One of Us because you couldn't find a decent role for yourself, and so you decided to write it for yourself?
Yeah, partly. This was a one-woman show I did in my last year at university, which was sort of my swan song, actually, because even though I'd really always enjoyed acting and writing, I had caught this disease from the uncles and aunties. I did think that women like me did not do jobs like that. And it's not surprising, I had no role models. I mean, you didn't see an Asian person on the television. You know, we weren't there reading the news, we weren't there as sports people, as actors, as writers, we weren't there.
So you were creating your own role and model?
Well, in a way, there was nobody else, really. So when you don't see yourself represented in the media, you do tend to think you're invisible and you don't belong there. So I'd put all those ambitions aside. I was actually going to do a further degree, and then I was going to do psychotherapy and drama as a sort of specialist subject. And so in my last year at university, I thought, right, I'm going to give all this up. I might as well just do one thing that expresses how I feel. And I created this show of a young Indian girl who's run away from home to become an actress. And I played all the different characters, about 12 different characters. I brought it to India, in fact, in the 80s, performed it in Delhi and Bombay. And there was something about it, I think, because it was so heartfelt and it was such a cry from the heart. And what I thought was going to be my farewell to my secret dreams is that it's actually a very powerful piece. And also there was this novelty that here was this brown woman doing stand-up comedy. I mean, this was just totally unheard of. And so it went on to win some prizes, and I got offered an equity card at the Royal Court, and suddenly...
7 years you spent there, in fact.
Yeah.
Were those formative years for you as an actress?
Excellent, best time to be there. I was in the golden age.
Now, you went on to do 2 major screenplays shortly thereafter, once you left the Royal Court, My Sister, Wife and Bhaji on the Beach. The most striking thing is the way you portray Asian women. You're deliberately defying convention with those images, aren't you?
Well, if you mean the convention of the sort of doe-eyed maiden walking 25 paces behind her husband going, "Ha, Sahib," then yeah, because those aren't the women I grew up with.
But how did the aunties and uncles react to the women that you were portraying on screen? I mean, did they identify with them? Did they rebel against them? Did they criticize you?
I think a lot of the women identified with it. You know, the irony is that Indian women, the ones I know, are very, very strong. They're not doe-eyed maidens. They have opinions, they have passion, they have desire. Unfortunately, something happens to a lot of Indian women when they get married, and those things are put into a box, and they suddenly become Mataji, you know, with the sort of rolls of fat and the complacency and all the things that one associates with just losing your identity. And, you know, I'd seen that in a lot of Indian women, and it made me sad, and I thought, No, I want to celebrate the women I know that haven't gone under, that are strong and do love their lives and are funny and are brave, because initially we're all like that as little girls.
And so in a sense you were reaching out to what you knew to be the truth, even if society or family circumstances didn't let that become so obvious.
Absolutely, yeah. And I didn't want to portray Asian women as victims. That was really important to me, because there was a lot of that stuff going on in the 80s when I sort of got into television acting, that there were Asian female roles being written, and they were all the same. It was either victim of arranged marriage, or woman in shop, or doctor with 3 lines. These terrible stereotype parts which just didn't reflect any of the women I knew, or who I was, or how I felt about being Indian. And I wanted to redress that imbalance.
It was 2 big events in the mid-90s and the late 90s that really catapulted you to fame. The first was your book, Anita and Me. It's a rollicking success, but did it ever surprise you that it had done so well?
Totally, yeah. I mean, I really wrote that book for myself. I mean, I was sort of known as an actress at that point, certainly not as a serious writer. I mean, I'd written the screenplays, but one always feels one's a proper writer when you've done a book. And I just thought my childhood was so extraordinary growing up in the village. I wanted to capture that whole first generation experience. I hadn't seen it done anywhere else before. And I thought, just for my sake, and maybe for the few people like me that can read it and go, that's our lives, my God, we were all going through the same thing, I felt it was important to put down. I had no idea that people would resonate with it, or it would take off in the way it did. I'm very gratified that it has. I mean, what's interesting about the book is a lot of Asians have read it, but an equal number of English people have read it and written in and said, you've reminded me of the village I grew up in. And
in fact, Channel 4's commissioned a film of it. Are you going to write the script and act in it too?
Yes, the film is going to be made hopefully next spring. It's all set to go.
And you scripting it?
Yes.
Acting as well?
I don't know. I could play my mother, but I think I might need to see a psychiatrist after that. So I think I might just take a very small part in it and watch.
Let's take a break then, Meera. I want in part 2 to talk about the other event that catapulted you to stardom. We'll be back in just a couple of moments. Stay with us. Welcome back. My guest is Meera Syal. We were talking at the end of part 1 about the 2 events that have really catapulted you to stardom. If Anita and Me was one, goodness gracious me, certainly the other. It's a runaway success in England, and it's now on our screens here. But where did the idea come from?
It was rather organic, actually. I'd been doing comedy often on comedy characters rather than stand-up around London, and felt very lonely. I couldn't really find any other British-born Indians that were doing that. So I sort of put the comedy aside for a while. And then suddenly, I did a show, a sketch show on the BBC, and there was a script editor on there called Anil Gupta. And I was also working with an actor called Kulvinder Gier, who was also in a sketch show with me. And Anil approached us and said, I really think we should do an Asian sketch show. He found Nina and Sanjeev, who were the other 2 performers, doing stand-up in West London, and brought the whole team together.
But was it hard to convince the BBC to take it on?
It was initially, yes. I mean, the first thing the commissioning editor said is, what is Asian comedy? Is there such a thing? Are you funny? And we said, well, we think we are. I think what helped is that we did it on radio first, and it attracted this huge following. And I think the reason that they said go ahead with the television programme is that they knew that the listeners on Radio 4 were white, were Middle England.
So you could reach out quite easily to non-Asians.
This show had already crossed over, that English people were listening to it and writing in and saying, this is brilliant.
But you know, the amazing thing is that so much of the show is what's called reversal jokes, going out for an English, or Indians not being able to pronounce simple English names like Jonathan. I know it's humor and parody, but are you also, in a sense, paying them back with their own coin?
Well, we hope so. I mean, we decided very early on that this wasn't just about laughing at ourselves. We also had to cast a very critical eye on the English community too, and their misunderstandings and stereotypes about us. And in fact, the most popular sketch, the one that everybody seems to know, it was called Going for an English, and it's about a group of drunk Bombay young people who go out for a bland English meal. And this was a huge success in Britain, because suddenly the British went, oh my God, is that how we behave in Indian restaurants? And we'd suddenly turned the mirror around and gone, look at yourselves. this is it from our point of view, and it really stunned people.
Did it surprise you that something like 80% of the audience is non-Asian and that you won the Best Comedy Series Award literally in your first year?
Yeah, we are surprised that it's been so successful. I think to date we've won 12 awards now, and it's certainly opened up other doors for us. And I think the strength of the show is, firstly, that it's very affectionate. We don't set out to shock or offend. We work on comedy of familiarity. I mean, all the jokes that come up are really from the cast, or the whole bunch of us sitting around and chatting about our families. And one of the first things that came up was, do your mum and dad keep suitcases on top of the wardrobe? And we all went, oh my God, yes they do. What is that about? And suddenly here was a joke. And a lot of the material came out like that. It was just sitting around going, that happened to you? Yes, I've got an auntie just like that who says, never go to restaurants, I can make it at home for nothing. So all this stuff was coming out.
So all the aunties that you grew up with suddenly featured in the comedy?
Absolutely fantastic material. I'm so glad I listened to them. We plunder our family shamelessly for material, but I think that's one reason the show works. It's affectionate. I think secondly, it's unapologetic. You know, we did not want to do a show where we were going, oh, please like us, and this is what Asians are about, so watch this and you'll learn something. And we thought, no, we're going to do what makes us laugh. If they get it, that's great. If they don't, we've lost nothing.
So the show, in a sense, is the voice of a new, confident, young Asian generation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think there's nothing more powerful than having the power of the punchline, which is what we have on this show.
Has the show, in a sense, also changed the way British people perceive Asians?
I think it has, actually, yes, to some extent. For example, I was walking in a park one day and this huge skinhead was walking the other way with his great big dog on his lead, and the kind of man that I would run away from very quickly because I think he's a racist and he's going to say something. Sure enough, he came right up to me and he went, I love that show, you're brilliant, that is a great show. And I thought, that's extraordinary. These are the people that will be beating me up 10 years ago, and now they're watching the show. So I think on a fundamental level, people don't tend to assume that we don't have a sense of humour, that we don't have a sense of irony, and that we're passive. I think people now are switched on to the fact that, you know, we can hold our own, we belong, we're confident.
Now, you've come to India to do a special episode of this series. Tell me about it.
It's just a one-hour special, a special one-off programme that will be going out next spring. And we wanted to film in India. We thought we needed a holiday. We deserved one. And also, we wanted to transplant the characters that have been, you know, all our characters have been Indians displaced from India, and we thought, what will happen if we actually put them back in the motherland?
And does it become comic when you bring them home? Are you exploring the comedy between Indians and British Indians?
Absolutely, yes. And also we've come up with some new characters while we've been here, just from observation, which we will now steal away and take back to Britain.
Let's talk a little about you personally, Meera. You were born in Britain, and all your influences as you grew up were British or European, and yet you're clearly Indian, and the characters that you write about are Asian and their traumas are Asian. So does that make you completely integrated, or just a little confused as well?
I totally accept that I don't quite belong anywhere, but this doesn't really worry me, to be honest.
Is it a richness that you feel, in fact?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always said if I was a middle-class white man, I don't know what I'd write about.
But if you were asked where do you come from, would you say Indian, India, British, Britain?
I'd say that I'm an Indian living in Britain, a British-born Indian, and both sides of the culture are quite important to me. But I think the world is getting smaller. I think I'm not unusual. I think there are many millions of people that
they understand that mixture and combination perfectly today in England, and in a sense, goodness gracious, needs help that understanding.
Yeah.
Do they understand it in India? Do you get questioned in India as if you're a slight oddity to Indians who...
Slightly, yes. But I think the whole NRI experience is something that people over here are quite in tune with now. And the internet has really changed that. I mean, now we are a global community. People are sort of talking to people in America, Australia, Canada all the time, so nothing is going to be as surprising anymore over the next few years. And increasingly, I see the issues that we've been struggling with in Britain are now coming here. You know, things like divorce, therapy, anorexia. These are all things that we would say, only the Gore do that. That never happens to us. And here I'm in India, and it's happening. So, you know, there are things that are not specifically British or Indian. There are issues that just come with industrialisation. and with the world getting
What about
smaller.
arranged marriages? Are they moving the other way? Are people in the West now looking to have arranged marriages themselves?
Well, I've had a lot of English friends say to me, I wish my parents would arrange me a marriage because I can't find anybody. There's still a fair amount of people in Britain that go in for what's called assisted marriage, more than arranged actually, which is that they want their parents help in finding someone. I've never had a problem with that. I think it's fairly, you know, any means possible.
You've come a long way from the young girl who was born in a mining town and had to pay the class pounds for application. What has success and recognition meant?
It means I get shouted at in the street by little school kids on their way to school with catchphrases. It's really annoying when you've just woken up. I don't know what the definition of success is, really. I mean, you know, I'm not a millionaire. I don't travel first class.
But you're recognized,
I live
you're
in a
watched,
modest
you're laughed
town.
with, you're read.
Yes, I suppose I am, but it hasn't made a huge difference to the sort of life I live. I live fairly modestly.
What about the fact that for many you've become a sort of spokesperson for the Asian community? Do you like that? Or do you find that to be stringent into your own personality and identity?
I find it a little uncomfortable, to be honest, because, you know, this phrase, Asian community, is bandied about so much. I don't actually know what that means. It's rather insulting for people to assume that just because we've all got brown skin, we think the same. And we don't. We're as divided by religion and class and education as any other group. So I don't think there is a homogenous opinion that an Asian community can have. So I find that tricky. On the other hand, I think if anybody that looks like me can get on television and it encourages other kids coming up who don't feel as I felt when I was a child, that they're invisible, then that's a great thing, and I embrace that.
You have a daughter who's 9. How's her childhood been different to yours?
I think she's much more relaxed about who she is because she has friends of many different cultures. In London, which is a supremely multicultural city.
She doesn't have this problem of wanting to fit in. She is in.
She is in. She's like a lot of other kids. So
And that, in a sense, is also a sign of how much Britain has changed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's one of the things I love about London, that I love the mix of cultures, that, you know, she goes to school with a Ghanaian girl and an Australian girl and a Swedish girl and a Pakistani girl, and they're all in the same class. And they all know about their heritage, but it's not a problem that they're all different.
And home for her is Britain, and India is a foreign country, although a country she's familiar with.
She's getting familiar with it now. She's actually with me at the moment, and she loves it. And now she's met all her cousins, I hope she'll come back regularly. So I want her to have a choice, which is all you can offer your children, really.
Meera Syal, thank you very much for a wonderful interview, and welcome home.
Thank you very much.